Welcome back. Actually, we're talking about a show called Bright Abyss, Sunrise in the West. It's a show of new work by artist Tom Pazderka, and this is at the basic premise, which is a new gallery in Ojai, just opened in August. The gallery is founded by Ted Nava and Matt Henriksen, and Matt is with us today talking about the gallery and the work that Tom has got hanging in the gallery. My question, which I kind of put forward as the $64 million or $1,000 question, is I've known Tom to work with ash as one of your medium. You're painting with ash and a composite amalgam. So now you've got a real big experience with ash.
Mm-hmm.
Reflect for me here.
Well, it's interesting. I think that my relationship. Well, you were asking if my relationship somehow had changed, during the break. I think it's
after the Thomas fire. If your relationship to ash changed,
right, and I still find myself actually actively resisting commenting on the fire. I feel like that's what's happening now, and I always feel like I'm the kind of artist that I need to take a step back, wait a while, see what happens, and then do it. I think the immediacy of and being with sort of in the moment, that's a difficult time for me to work because I don't know what side of me is really speaking. Is it the emotional side? Is it the intellectual side? I think just immediate reactions to me are that's not the way I work. But interestingly, the way I was, at least relating to the ashes, was not that much different from what it is now. I mean, I still use it. I still use the ash to make paintings of ash clouds. But now the imagery has definitely went in different ways. With the latest paintings, I've actually started painting people, which I have not done before. Everything prior to this show had basically people were left out. Even out of pictures that had people in them originally, I would just edit them out. So the idea was about the built world by people without the people present in them. And this time around, I think because of the show, the title of the show, and I think what I wanted to do with this small series is actually show that the abyss, so to speak, was part of the human experience. It wasn't just the emptiness, I think that this is when I said earlier that there was, the abyss in one's eyes. That's kind of the idea there as well. It's like, who are you looking at? The ash comes in sort of in the same way that the burning of the wood comes in, is that ash holds a memory of something that happened, like the fire, this big event. And here I'm talking about the previous fires that I started painting in response to, which were like the Ray fire that happened 2 years ago, and now obviously the Thomas fire. So the ash and the burning are this idea of burning something into memory. And then if you take it alchemically, ash is also something that holds information from or basically of the thing that it was burned. And you can actually do this. I mean, the practical component to alchemy is actually taking ashes and extracting salts from them. Salts, yeah, which they have a chemical component. I don't know I'm not a chemist, so I couldn't tell you what it is, but you can take anything that has been burned that has ashes and extract the salts from it by first submerging it in water and then boiling the water away. And then at the bottom, once you actually then strain away the sort of the dead stuff, the ash, what will remain in the water are the salts after the water has been boiled away. So that to me was really interesting, that information will remain always. And, then it becomes just like a mixture of everything. So like the ash are a repository of information to me. And then also I found out recently that ash and fire are one of the oldest words still in use today by humanity, along with the words like father, I, you, me. And somehow ash and fire are among them. I think there's something like 20 words, 22 words that are the oldest, like thousands of years.
You're nodding your head, Matt.
Just thinking about word and word origins and Nietzsche again, because he was a philologist. So just you being interested in connecting those things, and it makes sense with your work too, because you do a lot of text-based work. So thinking about ash linguistically, kind of creates a nice through line for the rest of the stuff. So
right. To me, it's just these relationships that they may not necessarily be right there front and center when you look at the work. But these are the things that are underneath it all, sort of. It is if we're going to go make that connection to the scaffolding, like that is the scaffolding on which the work is built. Uh-huh. So, I guess there may be a connection there between the two.
Well, and you're talking about information being preserved but hidden, like literally in the most way, it's just covered in darkness. Right. You're talking about information being preserved underneath the surface. Hidden information is very much that's what art is about. It's about getting you to take in an image, but there's information hidden within it. There's something else going on inside it. So
yeah, it's we have to go to a really quick break, don't we? So I want to tell you an interesting story from an appraisal standpoint, alchemically speaking. You were talking about your painting with ash. I have many clients who want to get that ash off those paintings, and I want to talk to you about the relationship between oil and ash. So I think you'd be interested. Don't turn that down. We'll be back with these two marvelous people talking about Tom's show up in Ojai. Don't turn that down. Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm talking with very talented artist Tom Pazderka and his show at the Basic Premise Gallery in Ojai. And we have with us one of the curators of the show, Matt Henriksen. And Matt's background is super interesting as well because he's a bookstore manager at the famous Bart's Books in Ojai and also is a gallery owner with his partner who is having a tooth pulled or something.
He had a tooth pulled yesterday, so he's not in any sort of talking mood today.
No. Well, wish him well for me, my dear. I want to talk a little bit about the installation that's in the show. Perhaps, Matt, you can introduce that to us and paint a visual picture for us. What is that?
Well, I'll just start by saying when I first saw Tom's work and I saw some of the different places he had shown it, I liked the things he had built to go along with his paintings and images. I thought it added an interesting extra layer. Sure. And so when we were curating the show for this, I'm like, all right, Tom, you got to build something in the space. And Tom immediately said, sure. Like what? It's like all I need is some like worn out old wood because he likes reclaimed materials and like start stockpiling it. So I did. And then I had a big pile of rotten wood, and then set him to work. And he's like, the idea changed over months and months, but ultimately it landed on a scaffolding, sort of a medieval design of a scaffolding. So that's how I describe it. It's got sort of several layers for somebody to be standing and or place their tools, and it's built largely out of reclaimed wood. So it has this sort of very old feeling and kind of a rotten, deteriorating feeling to it as well, which I think is significant to the work and the way it ended up being. I don't know.
And the idea of scaffold is also like the gallows as well.
There was some joking about hanging someone from it or something from it.
Yeah, there was. But actually, the idea with this one was that it wasn't the gallows, that it was the actual scaffold that you would get on to build another building.
I see.
So I know the connotation of the word scaffold, and again, this is the ambiguity of the term coming in, sort of like with bright abyss, and but in this regard, I really wanted to take it away from the idea that the scaffold is a place that you kill people, rather than this is something that helps.
Paint the ceiling.
Yeah, paint the ceiling or something like that. And I have a lot of experience with being on scaffolding and putting scaffolding together. When we were discussing the idea of what would go in the space, a number of things had popped up. I think one of them was a bit like a bottom of a Gothic cathedral column or something like that. That was the first iteration, and then there was a second and a third, and this last one was after I had researched a little bit about medieval scaffolding, and I immediately liked the way that it looked. And then the idea came that, like this is, since a lot of my work is about the built world and in what way do we relate to that built world, and then also by extension, we live in a world that is constantly falling apart.
Yeah.
Either we're destroying it or it's just falling apart by the way that nature takes it apart. Then this scaffolding is symbolic in many ways of that built world, in that it helps us build buildings, and then you just take it apart when you're done with it.
Don't we know it well now, huh?
Right. And then the other aspect of it is that it is built newly out of old wood. So that there was another layer there.
Okay. This is the $64,000 question for Tom.
Okay.
So I have known your work for about 3-4 years, and you do a lot with ash.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear about that when we get back from the break, because it's really significant right now. So I want to talk about ash and the relationship you have with ash, and if that's changed because of the last catastrophe, which I'm sure, Matt, you felt up in Ojai as well.
I did, and retreated to Santa Barbara during that.
You what did?
I retreated here to Santa Barbara during the fire, yeah.
And we were leaving too. All right, so don't turn that down. We'll be back with these wonderful gentlemen talking about Tom Pazderka's new show at the Basic Premise, which is a new gallery in Ojai. It's so cool that that's happening. And we're also joined by Matt Henriksen, who's one of the co-owners of the gallery and the manager at Bart's Books. So kind of a double whammy. Don't turn that down. Welcome back. That was the incomparable Philip Glass, and I'm speaking actually with the incomparable Tom Pazderka, and he actually is showing at a gallery called the Basic Premise, which is it connected to Bart's Books?
Nope.
No, it's
other than through me being in my
other
other
than
project,
through you.
yeah.
It's not okay. So, and that's managed by Matt. Now you're the bookstore manager at Bart's Books, but you also co-own with Teddy Nava, your partner of the Basic Premise Gallery.
Correct.
Okay, got that. And Tom, I've been following Tom's career, and everything he does I love. And so this new show I was fascinated by because of the connections here. And you were about to say, Matt, so we were talking before the break about that you go into folks' storages questing after books for the bookstore. And you've been doing this for years. And we started off the conversation by saying, materiality, I guess. And we're talking about your weird experience going into various storage lockers, of which, this is my bread and butter. So you were about to say something.
I was just going to mention one more story about, but you said you don't like to think of as pathology. I don't necessarily think of it like that, but just behavior that I've encountered in my book buying. And one of the strangest and one of my favorites was I went to the home of a former bookseller. He used to have a bookstore many years ago, and he had piles of books everywhere, which is typical. You think of the typical cluttered used bookstore. There's usually piles everywhere, and he had these piles everywhere, which was pretty normal, and you had to make your way through the maze of piles. But what had happened was he had let piles of books build up on his bed.
Yeah.
And so instead he was sleeping on the couch and the books were on the bed.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Another
Yeah.
strange inversion.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but here again, that's why that is such a classic poetry about letting the chaos be asleep for a while you think about. You don't actually have to physically do it, but when you're thinking about order. So the chaos is sleeping, and you're thinking about order. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating to me how people collect anyway. But that's something that you as a buyer for Bart's books are seeing. You're seeing that. Tom, tell me a little bit about the show. The show is hanging at the basic premise. It's called Bright Abyss.
Bright Abyss.
Bright Abyss, Sunrise in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the title.
So the title is, well, when we were thinking of titles, there was a bunch of different things that we were thinking of, and they just weren't working. But finally, when I don't know if it was me, Teddy, or Matt, but somebody just, I think I was working with Abyss as the word that I wanted to have in the title. And then I think somebody just shouted out, like, what about Bright Abyss? And I immediately liked it because Bright Abyss is a contradiction. Sunrise in the West is also a contradiction. Yeah. I think the whole show is somehow related to contradictions and the ambiguities of the everyday things that we kind of either take for granted or they're there. We just don't really tend to see them until somebody shows us their way of looking at it. So Bright Abyss was kind of like the idea that there may actually be a light inside the abyss, but I think that also is just the fact that an abyss is something that is very unknowable, and it being bright. Well, I don't really know what that says. I just find it inherently interesting that an abyss actually could be bright when you think about it. Like it could be something that something that is a source of illumination by
definitely
us sort of staring into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where that came from. Sunrise in the West was sort of the postscript to that. I was definitely thinking of some of the works that are in the show, and they're definitely difficult subjects, and they're difficult subjects to think about as well.
Give me an example.
Well, one is a painting of the Nazis that were brought in through Project Paperclip, which was an American program that brought in scientists from post-war Germany. Soviet Russia got half, America got the other half, and they formed the basis for the rocket program. So Werner von Braun was one of them. Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing with those kind of subjects, I thought like that. What that is, I think the ultimate in sort of darkness that brings in a speck of light. I think that without the Nazis, we would not have the rocket program. We would not have gone to the moon, and so on and so on. But then the picture itself.
The painting?
So the painting itself, when you look at it, is all the faces are smudged. They look really demon-like. And then I painted the names of various demons above their heads.
What was your take on that, Matt, when, you're hanging the show? What is the connection between you two?
I mean, similar to you, I saw Tom's work and was immediately attracted to it. There was something there that was powerful and undeniable, like some pretty heavy symbolism without feeling loaded. I think perhaps he's talking about this painting of the scientists, and they're sort of generalized. Their faces aren't obscured; they're more like they're wearing masks. So there's this sort of something that takes away the loadedness of it by doing that, because it generalizes it. It makes it less specific, and it's not like you're playing with these images that are more powerful than you. It's like you're grappling with understanding them, and that's what happens when you grapple to understand a thing. You're never going to get quite all the way there, but you get a piece of it. And so when I saw Tom's work, I felt that same thing immediately, that sense of attraction to it. Like this is something that I'm trying to understand. And I hadn't thought about this when we were brainstorming the title of the show, but it occurred to me immediately after we decided on that as the title. It's the infamous Nietzsche quote: "You gaze into the abyss, and the abyss gazes into you." And that's maybe where that contradiction can be resolved a little bit. Is what you get to see when you look in there, when it looks into you, is you get to see that kind of darkness of all of humanity, and that's the opportunity for the brightness, maybe.
Which I then related later to staring into someone's eyes too.
Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the opportunity to maybe look at the difficult things and the possibility that can result from that.
Well, I got to say it's interesting. Richard, pull that mic. I want to. I was reading something last night, and it was a translation from the Vedas, and it was interesting because the translator translated nirvana as desperation. So inspiration and desperation. Mm-hmm. So he translated. I thought it was so interesting because when we think about desperation, we think about staring into the abyss. We think about but the root of that word is spiration, to breathe in, breathe out. And I thought, well, it's the same word, really. Mm-hmm. Inspiration and desperation are the same. It never occurred to me before, but it's sort of talking about the contradictions that are in Tom's work and in this show, for example. What do you think, Richard?
Well, I suppose they could be interchangeable. I mean, one would lead to the other.
Yeah.
Either way. If you're desperate, then you're going to hopefully be inspired by something that will help you to get beyond that desperation.
Say rock bottom. You got to no way to go but up. Kind of thing.
I was told, for example, when I was dating, that women hate desperate guys. So if you are desperate, they're going to stay away from you. So give up the desperation, and you get what you want. You'll get someone to date.
I see, ground floor, huh?
Exactly. It's kind of like the Buddha too at the Bodhi tree. He was trying to find enlightenment, and as soon as he gave up trying to find it, he found it. So it's kind of like inspiration, desperation. Yeah, they could kind of work.
Yeah.
Hand in hand.
Yeah. I wanted to say, Matt, to go back. Yeah, Richard was giving us hints because we got to go to a quick break. But I wanted to go back and tell you the strangest book-related environment that I ever entered into. So all these years of going into people's houses, and I don't know how many. If we multiplied one house a day for me for 30 years, so I went into a house in kind of a warehousey district in L.A. And it was, a loft kind of thing. And the gentleman was a book collector and had been a book collector, but was also an installation artist. So, and he was not a spring chicken, older guy. And so for many years, he had collected paperback books. That was all. He didn't do hardcovers, collected paperbacks. And he lived with his wife in this warehouse type of thing. And his wife was getting tired of, no furniture, just everybody sitting on books. Paperbacks are hard to sit on anyway. And she got kind of annoyed. And so what he did was went and poured a glue amalgam over a great big pile of paperback books, and then took what do you use, those saws that you can cut down trees?
Chainsaw?
Yeah, got a chainsaw and started to sculpt furniture out of the glued books. And then he thought, well, this is kind of interesting, so let's do a whole wallscape. And he had this was an entire warehouse, because he eventually, he kept on going with this project. And it was so odd because, the glue caused a lot of mold and a lot of moisture, and then that caused a wonderful, to me, interesting patination and a really kind of like smell of new print books. And yet this whole thing was chainsawed and sculptured. And it was the size of, a good sized basketball court. That his whole built environment was, and it was such a shock. Because, you walk in and it's like, what's the smell? And then you see this furniture sculpted, and then, that even the kitchen, where he had his cutlery and plates and pots and pans, that was all sculpted out of glued up books, paperbacks. Most peculiar. But that was my strangest approach. Or my strangest approach to the written word. And then I was thinking, well, in the beginning was the word. Yeah, this is logos laid out in front, you see. Richard, we have to go to quick break, I guess. I want to talk more about the show because basically that's what Tom's here for. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the pieces in the show and the relationship between Tom's heritage. I have to cast my mind back to the first time Tom and I spoke. You were born in Czech. Mm-hmm. And you will detect, dear listener, a trace of accent when Tom speaks. And so he is also straddling two worlds here. So don't turn that dial back with Matt Henriksen, who is the co-owner of the Basic Premise Gallery in Ojai and the bookstore manager at Bart's Books in Ojai, and Tom Pazderka. His show is Bright Abyss, Sunrise in the West, at the Basic Premise Gallery in Ojai. Don't turn that down.
Welcome to the Arts and Antiques radio show with appraiser and art aficionado, Dr. Elizabeth Stewart.
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven.
Meet the prime movers of the Santa Barbara art scene and hear the tales of art, books, music, and experiences of great value. There's no place like Santa Barbara for the arts, where beauty works and thrives. What's valuable to you?
There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me.
Hello, Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. A while back, Tom, it's been a while.
Yeah.
I saw an MFA program that you, I think it was your final show at school.
It was the MFA show. So
it was the MFA show.
Yeah.
And I was arrested by this wonderful sort of wooden structure, and it was a cabin with faces, and it looked like somebody had just deserted it. And it talked about loneliness and individuality and being lost in the woods and staking out your claim and all sorts of really interesting things. And, it was a nice installation, beautiful installation. Then I found out that Tom Pazderka was also a two-dimensional artist. And I had him in, was 3-4 years, something like this. Then you were TAing for the school.
Yeah, that was actually while I was in the MFA. I was teaching.
You're TAing the FA.
Yeah.
And just, we've kept a relationship because I've really enjoyed following his work. And then I find out that he's showing at a bookstore called The Basic Premise that was founded August last year. And so I asked Matt Henriksen, who's here, the co-owner of The Basic Premise, to talk a little bit about some really interesting things that are happening. First, your show. Secondly, is it now, Matt, a good time to open a bookstore? I mean, I just finished a book called No Thanks, Mom, The Top 10 Objects Your Kids Do Not Want to Inherit. And on my list are books because it's been my clients' experience that they don't want, the kids don't want their books. So we're talking 30-year-olds do not want books. So I'm thinking, well, I would really like to hear your philosophy on that.
I actually didn't open a bookstore. I manage a bookstore in addition to opening the gallery.
Okay.
But I think now is a fine time to open a bookstore.
Okay.
There are a large number of bookstores opening all across urban areas, especially in Los Angeles. There's a number of great bookstores that have opened in the last 5 years.
Why?
People are hungry for tactile experiences. That they are hungry for experiences that go a little bit deeper and have a little bit of a lasting value, and
As opposed to?
things that are ephemeral, such as digital files are ephemeral.
I can't keep up. You know, this is the thing. It's interesting because one of the things I'm writing about in my book is it's based on experience. How old are you, Tom?
36.
Okay, so you're older than my son. So I tried to give my son and daughter-in-law quite a bit of my collections over the years, and that's why the book is entitled No Thanks, Mom. And so, part of that was, would you like, it was a really hard thing to do, Tom, but I had to go through, treasured collection large. I mean, we're talking $300 a month rental on storage locker, Matt, of books. Weed through those. I'm sure that those titles would be so appreciated by my son and daughter-in-law. Well, they want them, but they want them digitalized.
I'm in a storage locker almost every month purchasing books from people. That's just part of the process. But the truth is that people want books that they can connect to. And my grandfather was a painter, and I ended up with a big stack of his books a couple years ago, giant stack of his art reference books.
Yeah.
And I carried them around with me for years and years. And finally I realized, these aren't of a lot of use to me. I love a lot of the content, but they're older books, so the reproduction quality isn't that great.
Right.
But they're beautiful objects. And so I made the decision to keep the one that I could relate to, and I wanted to have a sense of connection to my grandfather.
Which one?
A book of Goya's paintings.
Okay.
One of my favorite artists. So I kept that one, and I got rid of all the rest of them. I just passed them along, let them go to somebody else who could make use of them. And I think that's pretty common in the world of books and artifacts, antiques, art, because it's usually for you, and there's maybe there's a little window where you can connect.
Little windows. Tell me more about that. How little window you connect? Is it so? I had. Let me tell you the backstory to this. Oh, Richard, Gesundheit. Yeah, I had a really interesting interviews with some folks yesterday from the Financial Times, and they wanted to talk about the Gen Xers, which you guys are, I think.
And like right on the edge.
You're on the edge. Okay.
That's about right for me.
So the Gen Xers and the millennial generation divesting themselves of what their parents considered ritualistic necessities to life. And basically the lady who interviewed me is a generation, I'm a boomer, so she's a generation older. And she said, I don't understand the lack of sentimentality. And I said, well, it's the object isn't sentimental, the story holds the emotion. So if the story can be told, the object is extraneous.
That's a pretty good assessment of what's going on. A lot of time, the connection to the actual object is in the person, and you're trying to pass along this connection, but they might only have a connection to a little bit of it, like I did with that Goya book, because it's my favorite artist. And I wanted to feel connected, but there's only so much room in your life for stuff.
See, that is a philosophy that I think the boomer generation doesn't hold to. In other words, there's only so much room in your life for stuff, and now we're starting to realize it. But previous to that, it was stuff was status builder, or it was home builder, or there was other purposes for stuff than, so one acquired.
Well, and you mentioned having a storage unit, and I mentioned going to storage units frequently, but the number of them that there are, and they're always building more and always enlarging them, but it amounts to people paying rent for an apartment for their stuff that they never visit or see.
Yeah.
Which is a strange thing to do.
What's the strangest storage locker you were in? And this is because you're book buying.
Yes,
for the basic premise.
No. The basic premise is the gallery.
Okay.
I run a bookstore that's separate from the gallery.
In the bookstore,
called Bart's Books.
Oh yeah.
So the strangest, maybe just based on context, is I went and bought a large amount of books from a hoarder, which is pretty typical. It's a hoarder that had passed away, and I was buying the books from his estate.
How big was the storage locker?
It was a fairly large storage locker. It was probably a 20 by 20, maybe a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. But it was strange because first I went to his apartment, and the apartment was literally just boxes. He had been most of his books were on film. He had been a projectionist, and it was boxes.
Most
and boxes
of his books were on film.
Yeah, were books about film.
Oh, on film,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
film industry. Okay.
So, but in his living room, knee high, piled, were boxes and boxes of film trailers from like 30 years. Like, you could wade through
Tom's
them.
getting an inspiration
And-
here for another installation. I can see
Right?
it.
And walking, I wish I'd taken more of them, actually. I dug through them for a minute. Most of them are trailers that nobody cares about. I took 2 of them home because I thought I could maybe sell them, but most of them it's not even worth the time because I want the books.
Yeah.
I have a market for those, not for the trailers. But I waded past those. Those were his living room. So the living room was completely unusable. Went past that into his bedroom, and his bedroom was piled maybe 5 feet high in one corner, and then it was kind of like an avalanche would happen from the corner, just books in a pile from the corner of the room all the way down to the center of the room. So this was the house, which was nearly unlivable. And then when I got to the storage unit, everything was neatly ordered and stacked and categorized in labeled boxes. So he cared more for the stuff he was storing and its living space than he did for his own, which was a strange inversion for me.
Okay, I'm going to throw another. So this is something that, I've been appraising for 30 years, and so I go into people's houses daily. So I have seen so much of this. It's not a pathology, but many people think it is, this hoarding thing. It's actually, in my mind, an attempt to order one's universe. And so the attempt to order, a collection of anything is an outward attempt at order. And so it doesn't necessarily reflect any kind of disorder one feels inside of themselves. It's not a psychic projection in that way. But it is an attempt to get a handle on some semblance of order somewhere you can do it. And the idea is that we have a definite opinion about what order looks like.
With books, I particularly see it as an attempt to externalize the contents of one's minds when you have a book collection. That's kind of the way I see that. So if you can think of that as a sense
Or
of
lack
order.
thereof.
Yes.
You see, so but what I'm saying is that this idea of let's order one's universe, the idea that his living space was, in your opinion, disordered, in his opinion, that was order. It was order in the way of eventually it was going to be a creative it is a creative disorder. It was on its way to being ordered, and the end result was the storage locker. So it was a process. So people say, well, somebody is pathologically maladjusted because they hoard. My reaction is, what difference does it make if you collect milk cartons as opposed to Goya? It's all an attempt at ordering your universe. And we are, by human standards, categorically inclined. We think in categories. We think in groups of things. And so this is a way to think creatively about a group of things. Disorder is that way. And so it's super interesting. I always ask people whose job it is to visit people's collections and storage lockers what their opinion is on this sort of thing. It's fascinating what you've just said. Richard's hand signals are happening, which means we got to go to quick break. And were you able to get Tom's? Okay, Philip Glass, Tom Pazderka's selection of our in and out music. Philip Glass, don't turn that down. Welcome back. This is Elizabeth Stewart. I'm talking about a show that is happening at a new gallery in Ojai called The Basic Premise, and I'm always interested to cover new galleries when they open. And the co-curator is here, and that's Matt Henriksen, and his partner is suffering from a tooth pull, so Ted Nava is not here. However, the artist that they are featuring, Tom Pazderka, is here, and we're talking about the show, which is titled Bright Abyss, Sunrise in the West. And I was going to say, Tom, for years I've watched his work, and he paints with ash, and he, mix an amalgam with oil, and it's one of his mediums that he uses. And I was saying that I've had so many clients now that have problems with their paintings that have been exposed to ash, and some very dense ash, and the oil itself merges in a really interesting chemical way with the ash in the atmosphere. And what happens over time is that the oil and the ash mix, but what the toxicity is to the paintings, Tom, is actually the composite, whatever it is, doesn't necessarily eat the painting, it eats the canvas eventually. And so the support eventually is deteriorating, whereas the oil is living still. Mm-hmm. The support is at peril.
Interesting.
And so we have to extract out in a very careful way, because oil, of course, the reason oil in canvas has been around since the 14th century is because it's flexible, but also that the oil forms an amalgamation with the canvas. So the ash toxicity floats all the way through the oil into the canvas and then breaks down the support. So right now there's terrific effort to try to stop that, because over time, time is the enemy here. Over time, but there's been a number of my collectors that have a real problem with that. And here you are as a painter. You're smiling. Here you are as a painter using that as your medium.
Actively putting it into the painting. Yeah.
So, and Matt, that's my story. What do you think?
It's the preservation of painting has always been difficult, and you've seen, I'm sure, plenty of paintings that have been hung above fireplaces, which is less like almost nightmarish what it does to them. But I have been a little bit concerned about this with some of Tom's work too. I'm like, what is the stability of this as a medium? The truth is, it's probably not that stable.
No, probably not.
Well, but is that the point then? Maybe.
Well, yes, actually, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the breaking down of things is inherently part of the human experience, and I think that we would deceive ourselves to basically think that any painting in the world, no matter how archival the materials, is not going to somehow deteriorate over time. Like I think that's sort of our delusion that we're going to keep this pristine thing forever. And I don't really buy into that, honestly. I just feel like, no, like we make things because there's a reason for them to exist. And with this, the commentary is sort of on par with the idea that things will eventually deteriorate, so why not embrace it as opposed to try to resist it? But my materials are slightly different. I don't work on canvas. I work on wood, and so I think there we're talking different time frames. But
It seems to me that fits thematically with your work too, because a lot of your work seems to be about the deterioration of history, the deterioration of memory, the deterioration of the systems that we build as people. Not only the systems, but like the actual things we make too, like buildings. And that seems to be a theme of your work as well as the medium.
We got 1 minute, Matt. Tell folks how they can get in touch with the gallery to come and see the show.
The gallery is open Friday and Saturday evenings, 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And we are also open by appointment. You can email us at thebasicpremissegallery@gmail.com.
Thank you both, Tom. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.